Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As I never get tired of saying, this show has a single purpose, holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And to do so, we don't just focus on the behavior of individual cops. Instead, we focus on the system of inequality fueled by injustice, which makes bad policing possible. But before I get started, I just want to ask you to please like and share and comment on our video, and I will try to respond to your comments. And you can email us evidence privately at par@therealnews.com, and we might be able to investigate for you, just like we did for our guest today. Now, today we're covering a breaking situation that involves a former guest on our show who's being punished with solitary confinement following a questionable arrest earlier this year. His name is Blind Justice. He's a veteran and auditor who has used his YouTube channel to monitor government buildings for compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's a focus that has caused friction with local authorities and occasionally put him in serious jeopardy. For example, his efforts to probe local health department facilities in Madison, North Carolina, led to an aggressive arrest, and as a result of that violent arrest, a stint in the hospital. But the most recent problem for Blind Justice is the result of this, an arrest this February in a church parking lot captured in part on video. As you can see, a Madison, North Carolina police officer escalates an encounter with Blind Justice and his wife while the couple was playing, of all things, Pokemon Go. They were parked in a church parking lot because there was a Pokemon stop there. The officer became enraged when Blind Justice, who was the passenger, refused to cooperate with his investigation. A lack of compliance with law enforcement that led to charges of interfering and resisting an arrest. But that's just the beginning of this story, because what happened next says more about the imbalance of the justice system we highlighted at the beginning of the show than all the statistics or studies we could cite to prove it. And to make the point, I'm joined by the wife of Blind Justice, who is going to tell the story of how a minor encounter with a cop has now led to a life-altering experience, which has put her husband in harm's way. Nina, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Taya.
Now, I know recently your husband, Mike, also known as Blind Justice, was assaulted while protesting or exercising his free speech. Can you describe what happened?
We went for a walk in the town we live in Madison, North Carolina. He carried a sign and I carried the camera. And we were surprised after about an hour to be surrounded by an angry mob. One of the guys stopped his car in the middle of the intersection and ran and attacked Mike and was ripping his sign out of his hand and destroyed him. And another guy came over and joined in the scuffle. And it was really scary. Multiple 13, 14, 15 trucks were revving their engines going by and blowing smoke at us. And it just got really scary. And the cops around didn't seem interested in doing anything to stop the illegal activity, the criminal activity that was happening all around them. And it was very disconcerting, but really showed the true colors, I guess, and what the real situation is. It's unwanted speech is not protected.
So his main focus is with the Americans with Disabilities Act. He acts as an auditor, ensuring that the government buildings comply with the ADA. Why is this so important to him?
So as a person who is blind, he faces a lot of challenges. And what we have discovered, it seems like, one, blind people seem to have been forgotten. It's almost like the forgotten disability in some ways. And two, a lot of people are so afraid, that's one of the big fears, is becoming blind. They did a poll and found out that many people would rather just die than become blind because it was such a scary thing. And with that, a lot of people just don't understand all of the advancements in technology that are available to them. And we have discovered that the government facilities are completely clueless as to what is available to the disabled population, not just to blind people.
So he was asked to appear in court and was at the courthouse steps trying to get in, but the judge would not allow him in with his assistive aids, even though most of those aids were actually issued by the VA or Veterans Administration. What happened next?
This bench trial was directly related and to the charge that my husband received when we were in the church parking lot back in February, and I was playing Pokemon Go. And the cops came demanding ID, and my husband, who was blind, the blind passenger in the vehicle, refused. He stood on his rights, his Fourth and his Fifth Amendment rights there, to be secure in his paper houses and effects and not supply his papers. And then they hauled him off to jail. And so on Tuesday, the 6th, he had the bench trial. Prior to that, he had been made aware that there was an electronics ban on the courthouse that the judges had implemented, and had put in multiple ADA requests for accommodation to let them know he has these devices that he plans on using to gain equal access to the courts. And they denied. Not only did they deny, Judge Chris Freeman actually issued threat that Mike would be held in criminal contempt if he were to be in the courtroom with those devices.
Preventing me from appearing. So I'm still here intending to appear before the court. So I've been denied access. I'm here to do the business of the court, acting in good faith. So if you want to arrest me because I'm at court, then that's on you. But I'm here to do the business of the court. I'm here to go to court.
We want to know if going in naked is an option. Can he go in naked as an option?
Watch the Nazis.
Can he go in his man?
Breaking the oath and breaking the Constitution. The first oath they took is to protect our Constitution.
So Mike came to the courthouse. There was more back and forth, but Mike came to the courthouse in good faith that they would acknowledge that he has the right to access the courts equally. Was met by guards at the door that said he could not even enter the building with his devices on him. And then while he was outside, still standing there hoping to appear before the judge, his attorney went in, let the judge know what was going on, and the judge issued a failure to appear warrant, which the guards who were barring him from entering then enacted and arrested him and took him to jail.
So what kind of bail are you looking at, and how will this financially impact your family?
So we found out that the bail that they set is a $50,000 cash bail with the condition of essentially house arrest. They said it's unmonitored, but if he's seen walking around, going anywhere other than attorney things, medical appointments, or court, that he would be arrested. So yeah, that's like half of a house. That's a lot of money. He went in on the first appearance and reminded the judge that in North Carolina, for a class 2 misdemeanor, which this is, as a first offense, which this is, there's no jail time. And you can't hold a person for a failure to appear warrant for longer than they would have been sentenced for if they had been found guilty. And in this case, you can't hold him. And the attorney told the judge, you can't hold him. And the judge responded, we're going to keep it like it is. And the attorney was just dumbfounded. I think he's just completely shocked at the situation, and he's never experienced anything like this before.
Now, as we've learned, blind justice is currently in solitary confinement, which many human rights organizations consider a form of torture. Think about what that means and bear in mind what put this process in motion. First, an innocent encounter with an overbearing cop turns ugly. Then, as blind justice attempts to appear for his day in court, authorities bend the law to force him into breaking the law. Now, a person who presents no present danger to society is in danger himself. And to find out what police and prison officials are using to justify this outcome, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Taya. I appreciate it.
So, Stephen, you've reached out to the police and correction officials about the arrest. What have they told you?
Well, I reached out to the sheriff's department. They put me in touch with their public information officer. I left a message and asked this specific question: what the justification for, why was he arrested for an FTA, and why was he arrested when he had shown up? And so far, they have not called back, but I will continue to reach out and we will continue to pursue an answer.
So, Stephen, what about the correction officials? What are they telling you about his treatment?
I was able to get in touch with corrections officials. They were not able to locate him yet or tell me what his status was, because I think basically their database only deals with people who have been sentenced, convicted, or are currently in prison. And I did ask about his status, if he had been put in some sort of solitary confinement. As of yet, they have not been able to answer that question.
So finally, Stephen, when we first covered this story, you did some research into the Madison Police Department, taking a look at the trends regarding the growth of incarceration in rural communities. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, it's amazing because Madison has 18 police officers And according to the data we looked at, just 61 crimes in 2019. So you do the math. I mean, we're talking 3 or 4 crimes per officer. And it's interesting because the police department has like an administrative staff, evidence, all sorts of bureaucracy. So it just raises the question, why would a town that barely has any crimes worth noting have a police department staff of 18? So again, it demonstrates just how disproportionate American policing has become.
Now, it's clear that what we have here are two stories. One about a single man's encounter with what appears to be law enforcement overreach that has had profound implications on his life. And two, an encounter that appears to be connected to the broader imperative of a system which is the largest incarcerator of human beings in the world. It's not hard to draw the conclusion of how this trend of increasing incarceration rates in rural America and the arrest and imprisonment of blind justice are related. I mean, a man showing up to a court date is hardly a threat, and if indeed entering the court with medically prescribed devices compromised public safety, authorities have yet to make clear exactly why they acted as they did. The main goal of blind justice's activism is to show how people with disabilities are discriminated against and how often our government and law enforcement don't support and accommodate them. What could illustrate this cruelty further than this need for his VA-approved disability aids being used as an excuse to keep him out of the courtroom and to throw him into solitary confinement? The irony is excruciating. But there's another story that has unfolded this week that makes the case of blind justice even harder to explain and reminds us why efforts to hold police accountable are often thwarted by a system which works in their favor. That's because, unlike blind justice sitting behind bars for his FTA, a man charged with murder walked out of his cell this week to the consternation of activists. We all know of this man, Derek Chauvin, for his role in the death of George Floyd. Chauvin was the officer seen here on this video putting his knee into Floyd's neck. The Hennepin County medical examiner ruled that the pressure which Chauvin exerted for more than 9 minutes was the primary reason that Floyd died, a conclusion that led to charges of second-degree murder against Chauvin and a hefty $1 million bail. But to the surprise of many, Chauvin walked out of his cell last week after he somehow posted the pricey bond. It's not clear at the moment how a police officer managed to raise that kind of money, but what is clear is the stark contrast between how the justice system treats two men whose crimes are not even comparable. One man with a questionable FTA sits locked up with little hope of getting out. Another, accused of the brutal murder of an innocent man, is free to travel between 4 states prior to his trial. To discuss the implications of this development, I'm joined by one of our favorite guests, Otto the Watchdog. Otto, who is part performance artist, part auditor, and part cop watcher, who has built up a large YouTube following holding police accountable. Otto, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
The cop who killed George Floyd made a $1 million bail, but a blind activist is given a $50,000 cash bail and can't make it. What does this tell you about our system of justice?
First of all, the police officer is his bond was posted by the Fraternal Brotherhood of Police, the police officers union. So it's really nothing to him that this bond was posted. There was another police officer in Texas just recently who killed a man. He is being charged with murder. He has been fired. It's very different circumstances here, right? That police officer also posted his $1 million bond within hours. So if you're backed by big money, then you can kill somebody and get away with it, at least temporarily. Right. And whether or not the officers, either one of these officers are going to be actually convicted is still yet to be seen. And with past experiences, it's not very hopeful. So when somebody is placed on $1 million bond, that's already shocking. Right. Because that implies that someone would have $1 million to basically promise the court that you will show up and participate in the proceedings. Right. So I would not be able to come up with $1 million. I don't know anybody who's able to come up with $1 million. It's a huge issue. And if you have the backing and you can afford that, that's fine. But if you're a poor person who works at McDonald's and You didn't show up to work because you couldn't find a babysitter, or you didn't show up to court because you couldn't find a babysitter, and then you get a failure to appear and you get arrested, even if it's for 24 hours, the chances are you're going to lose your job. The interesting thing about Blind Justice and his activism is that he's really not a fuck cops guy, as what you might expect from someone like me, for example. He's very polite, very calm, very cool. I really don't ever see him cussing very often, like at all. So him writing it on a sign is, it's edgy, right? And I think that part all came because of the issues that he was having before, right? So he never had an issue with people. It was always just the police and the government, right? And then he was complaining about that, and that's what brought the people in.
What kind of pushback from police supporters have you seen to you and to Blind Justice when you're exercising free speech?
No matter what you do, you're going to get death threats. Uh, uh, then when it gets a little bit more, what I would say extreme is physical confrontations and violence and things of that sort, which are common. Um, there's really nothing unique about this situation, and that's the problem.
So it seems clear that one of the reoccurring themes of this show are applicable to this story. As we've outlined with regards to the police, our country has fashioned a two-tier system of justice that seems to separate law enforcement from the rest of us. Just consider the case of how bail reform has played out in our state of Maryland. In 2018, the state's highest court issued an order requiring judges to take into consideration a person's ability to pay before setting bail. The idea was to not force detainees who were poor to sit in jail simply because they couldn't afford to buy their way out. At the time, when Stephen and I covered the story, the bail industry argued that not giving people bail would lead to a huge contingent of people not showing up for trial. The industry argument was, without financial incentives, people would simply skip court. But that's not what happened. Instead, a study conducted after the first full year of bail reduction found that the difference between pre-bail and post-bail FTAs were statistically the same. In other words, despite the fact that fewer people had to post bail, the same number showed up for trial. In fact, studies have shown the best way to lower FTAs is to simply send a text message to defendants reminding them of their court date. But effectiveness, efficiency, and fairness often seem to elude the grinding wheels of justice in this country. Maybe that's because, as Otto pointed out, the American bail industry is funded by Fortune 500 insurance companies. Maybe it's because an industry predicated on basically offering usury loans to people who can't afford it is just too good a business to reform. However you analyze it, the fact remains that a system that incarcerates a man for showing up to court but lets an alleged killer walk free is perhaps in need of an overhaul, to say the least. The inequities this process reveals should give us all pause, not just with a stark example of imbalance and poor judgment, but what it tells us about the forces that truly drive a system that's supposed to be built upon the idea of justice, but seems more interested in profit. I would like to thank my guest, Nina, also known as Mrs. Justice, for joining me during this difficult time. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank Otto the Watchdog for his insights and for speaking with us today. Thank you, Otto.
Hey, no, thank you, Taya, because the mainstream media is absolutely not going to cover any topics like this at all. And if they do, it's usually not in favor of the people.
And of course, I have to thank intrepid journalist Stephen Janis for his writing, reporting, and editing on this piece. Thank you, Stephen.
Tay, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't thank friend of the show, Noli D. Thanks, Noli D. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com. And you can also reach us via Facebook and Instagram at the Police Accountability Report or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can always message me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Facebook or Twitter. And please like, share, and comment. You know I read your comments and appreciate them, and I respond whenever I can. My name is Taya Graham, and I am your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.